Welcome back to First Class Fantasy. I'm Theo Greminger. I'm joined, as always, by Billy Muzio. And Billy, we have like a first in the history of First Class Fantasy. We have a first-time, two-time guest with our friend Nelson Sousa, aka the Franchise. Nelson is one of the best high-stakes drafters in the country. I have split teams with him. I talk to him quite regularly. I believe in his process, and the results speak for themselves. Nelson's won pretty much everything. We got a ton of great feedback the last time Nelson came and chopped it up with us on First Class Fantasy. This is going to be a lot of fun today. Last week, Billy and I had a draft episode, so definitely go check that out if you want to watch Billy and I draft in the 125 FFPC Best Ball Contest. That was a lot of fun. Definitely go check that one out. But one guy that's drafting, pretty much every night now, or close to it, Nelson, in August is yourself. Welcome back to First Class Fantasy. How you doing, my man?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I don't know if it's like a positive or a negative that I'm this first time, second all-time.
It's a huge positive, Billy. It's a positive, Billy. It's
yes,
a positive, right?
Yes. You either didn't have anyone else, and it's like, oh crap, we gotta all right. Let's just ask Nelson if he's free.
No way, Nelson. No way. This is your time to shine. Me and you are going to be drafting together in the New York Super in a few weeks now. So this is like money time. This is August. This is when we really get after it. You're grinding out content. Your articles are excellent. Highly recommend Nelson's work at FTN. Nelson, why don't you tell everybody about what you've dropped so far on the article side, what they can get during the season, and talk about that cool podcast you're dropping these days.
Absolutely. So I've got, my rankings, and then the most popular article on there is my fade list. So that always gets a positive reaction from people. I also have I have a couple of articles that are going to be coming out. One is a league winner article, and I know I kind of despise that word, using league winner, but last year my article was on DeAndre Hopkins, and it kind of came to fruition, except, obviously at the end of the season he got hurt and everything, and it was unfortunate with Kyler with his injury, but when he came back from suspension, I mean, he was pretty much a wide receiver one, locked in, and he helped a lot of my teams, kind of propel them into the playoffs. So I'm going to come out with that article. That's going to be a big one on the player that I think is going to be this year's league winner. And we also have a podcast. I'm joined with Maddie Davis and Vlad Sedler. It's going to be the High Stakes Fantasy Podcast. So that's going to be on a weekly basis that we're going to have that right into the season. And, again, just busy right now with like the Discord chat over at FTN with helping subscribers with their upcoming drafts and answering questions.
Yeah, no, definitely highly recommend Nelson's work at FTN. It's excellent. And we had D-Hops on our team last year, Nelson. We had the D-Hops Rondell Moore combo, which was like a great way to cover yourself. But then Rondell Moore missed the very beginning of the season, so that was a little bit of a pain. But we're still worked out well when D-Hops comes back and gave you 15 plus points every single week. Billy, how are you doing today, man? I want to give you a shout out. You crushed it on press coverage last week. During crossover week, and you've been putting out just tremendous podcasts all off season. How's everything going with you today, Billy?
Yeah, podcast's been busy. Everything's going good. Just did a really deep dive into the projections. Went through every single team, went through all the quarterbacks, all the running backs, all the receivers, all the tight ends, and really kind of analyzed all the numbers with Dario. And so we went through and made sure all the yards per attempts and yards per carries and yards per receptions, all of them were updated. It's a really deep dive. It takes quite a bit of time. And so we did that in the last 2 weeks. We finished here just yesterday. So those have been updated as of last night. And the projections are the most recent and up to date on the site. And I'm probably going to go through and update the analyst cheat sheet this weekend and have that ready to rock and load for Monday for everyone doing drafts in August.
And Billy, I forgot remind everybody where you finished last year in the Fantasy Pros rankings for rankers, and also the year before. I can't remember. I can't keep track.
So 2021 was a good year. It was number 1. In season last year was number 4. My draft rankings, I took some big stabs last year in the 2022 draft rankings. Didn't finish as well. So I took a lot of big swings and missed on those big swings. So I believe in staying true to your numbers and not adjusting based upon what the masses are doing. And so I think that there's a big edge in doing that. If you hit, you really hit. If you miss, you really miss. And so I took some stabs. It didn't work out. So draft rankings last year weren't the same caliber as 2021 or the in season for 2022. But we're, reworking the workshop, and we're going to get them posted here shortly. And I hope to have another good year in season.
I think you're going to crush it this year, except on Jackson Smith and Jigba, who's going to bring you down a little bit, Billy, until you
Has Nelson voted on this yet? I forgot.
So wait a minute. Is Billy like pro Jackson?
No. Okay. So Nelson did not vote on this on the first podcast. So every time we get someone on,
Nelson's going to be with you and Dave
so.
Hubbard on the Dave Hubbard and Billy
All right,
Muzio
Nelson.
side.
So Theo and I have a $350 bet at an FFPC. And so when we look at it, the bet is Jackson Smith the Jigba, wide receiver 36 or better, or wide receiver 36 or worse.
Oh man, he's going to need an injury to be 36 or better.
Man, Theo, I mean that's a lot of analysts against you here on this one.
Listen, I got a lot of sharp money.
It could happen, but I mean, where he's going in drafts, I'm not interested in him.
Same.
So
here.
I have Billy, I have Nelson Sousa, and I have Dave Hubbard, who's one of the best players in the world, are all on the Billy Muzio side. But I do have Danny Mueller sent me a nice message that he's big time into Jackson Smith and Jigba, and he took him in the pros versus Joe's. Nelson. He reached on him to grab him, so he's bullish. Guys, we're actually going to make an on the air pick. I am in a $350 FFPC Fantasy Pros draft right now. I'm trying to win $1 million. So the three of us are going to brainstorm what I'm going to do with my 4th round selection. And I'm going to cut you guys each. If I win the $1 million and you guys help me with nail this 4th round pick, you're each getting Venmo'd $5,000 the morning after the FFPC pays me. So $5,000 decision as soon as we come back.
All right.
Hey, people always ask me, what's the World Series of Fantasy? What's the Super Bowl of Fantasy? And it's easy. It's the FFPC. Their signature Players Championship has a $6 million prize pool, and their best ball leagues start in February. And they're the answer to so many questions. Hey, what's the best place to get a Dynasty Orphan? Well, you can adopt a Dynasty Orphan at the FFPC right now. There's more orphans at the FFPC than anywhere else on the internet. That's why we partner with them. So if you want to play fantasy football for low, medium, high stakes, you love Dynasty, you love best ball, you love seasonal leagues, all types of fantasy footballers need to go to the FFPC. And remember, use promo code Underworld. Promo code Underworld gets you $25 off your first team. Promo code Underworld, $25 off your first team, no matter what the format is, at the FFPC. Go get it.
Welcome back to First Class Fantasy. Billy, why don't you queue up this draft board? Billy's a little better with the StreamYard navigation than I am.
The czar of StreamYard.
The czar. He's not quite czar. You're like the assistant czar of StreamYard to our own Matty Kiwoom. Okay, guys, so I'm in the 10 spot here. This is again, a $350 tight end premium PPR league, 4-point passing touchdowns for the quarterbacks. So I went with Stephon Diggs out of the 10 hole. I'd considered Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, CeeDee Lamb. And then I thought about a Mandrews build, but I just didn't do it to have the elite tight end. Then the second round, CeeDee Lamb was a fairly easy pick. CeeDee Lamb and Stephon Diggs are not a unique pairing, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. So I have access to 2 what I believe top-notch wide receivers. Now, I'm interested to see your guys' thoughts on my 3rd round selection. Josh Allen and Ramondre Stevenson were 2 guys that I was looking to draft in the 10 hole, the 310. I went with Lamar Jackson. I want more exposure to Lamar Jackson, especially in this tournament. I think Lamar Jackson has QB1 overall upside. And with Josh Allen going off the board, it's sort of been a trigger lately for Lamar. So I looked at the teams 11 and 12. I thought with the kind of balanced drafting that they were showing, I would potentially lose the option of Lamar. And I had Najee Harris, Josh Jacobs in my queue, but I also had Travis Etienne currently in the queue, which I'm kind of into Etienne right here in the 4th round. So your guys' thoughts on my Lamar Jackson pick? Nelson?
I'm okay with it. I mean, I'm pro going elite quarterback this year, so I'm totally fine with it. He could be the QB1 this year. He's got that type of potential, so nothing wrong with it.
Billy, is this direction you would have gone, or would you have gone with maybe another wide receiver or my RB1?
I think it's fine. With it being redraft, I typically will push quarterback a little bit. It depends upon what you're trying to accomplish in this draft, right? If we're building an early quarterback team, great. But if I'm doing multiple, I'm swapping it up, right? I'm going elite early. I'm doing some mid, some late, just giving myself different exposures. But I think Lamar's fine. I like Lamar as well. He's rotated in between quarterback 4 and quarterback 6 in my projections every time I update them. Right now, he sits at 6, but I agree with Nelson. It would not surprise me if Lamar Jackson finished as the QB1 with the rushing upside and the new Monken offense. So I'm fine with it here as well. What do you think you're going to do on this pick now coming back?
Well, my queue right now is Travis Etienne. That would really be, Breece Hall is also in the queue. I don't love necessarily taking Breece because I feel like that's going to kind of paint me into having to draft another running back slightly early to kind of make up for the potential of missing him for a few weeks. Jerry Jeudy would be my preferred wide receiver. I have quite a lot of Christian Watson, Billy. And this is, I'm not saying that I'm done drafting him, but tiebreaker, I would prefer Jeudy for this build if I go wide out. And then I have Darren Waller as my 4th option, pushing up a tight end who will not be there for me when I pick at the 5'10". I think he's got elite pass catching ceiling. I do not like drafting a quarterback and a tight end early back-to-back at all, but I think he is a little bit of a standout. And then I do have Christian Watson in the queue. Nelson, any other players that you would drive up into consideration here, or is this probably the correct ones in the queue?
Just looking at the draft board, I had, before you mentioned names, I had Jeudy and Waller as the 2 guys that would be my picks. I think I'm good with ETN. I've always been a fan of his, but I just rather, if you're going to build this team, I'd rather see you go elite quarterback, elite tight end with those 2 wide receivers, or continue with the wide receiver and build that strength, and then figure out what you're going to do. The only problem is in this format, you're probably, once you pass on Waller here, you're probably going to punt back tight end.
I think I'm not selecting one until maybe the 8th, 9th, 10th round. There's really no point in pushing one up if it's not Waller, in my opinion. And there's no guarantee, like even a Kittle will be there at the 5'10" if I'm chasing it. Potentially a Goddard sometimes lands at the 5'10", but I think his target ceiling, Nelson, you would say is far, far lower than what we're expecting out of Waller right now.
Yeah, I think so. And I think team 3, the way he's built his team, I think Goddard's going to be a target of his. So I would actually predict that Goddard's going to be gone, Kittle's going to be gone. So I would probably build it that way. I know what you're saying about QB tight end early. That's always kind of been a rule of mine, but I've actually changed that. I've actually been keeping an open mind this year and try to get elite production out of those 2 positions early and figure out my running back situation later.
And Billy, you've talked about this before several times on podcasts where in an FFPC draft, if I draft a Waller, I can essentially go naked tight end for the next 10 rounds and really not worry about tight end 2. I think that's kind of a luxury where, like when we built our best ball's like a different animal, but we had to go with like a 4 tight end build because we punted, we punted tight end until like round 15, but we still ended up having to draft 4 of them in that 20-man best ball draft. So is that like another appealing thing for you in terms of, tiebreakers to the position?
Yeah, redraft a different animal than best ball. I would say, though, that as much as I like Waller, he's my tight end 4, I don't like to force it in a build all the time, right? And when you take a look at what you've done here, the first person that came to mind was Jerry Jeudy. Just because I like what Nelson said as well. Like, you want to keep an edge at the position right now. Your edge would be going a receiver or tight end. You're going to win at quarterback. You're going to win at receiver. You're going to win at tight end. I would lean into receiver a little bit more because when we look at correlation, and correlation matters a lot in best ball, but it also matters in redraft as well, especially once we get into playoff weeks. And when we get into playoff weeks, Detroit is facing Denver. So I would like a Jeudy pick here to kind of lean into that game. I think could be a pretty explosive game in playoffs. And then you also get that Detroit correlation with the Lamb pick as well. So you get a little bit of, and you could pick some later Detroit pieces. And so we would talk about tight ends. You could pick up now Laporta later. You could pick up a Jameson Williams later, and you can get some double correlation players to kind of assist in these stacks for these weeks and for your playoff push. And then that allows you to also look at one of your favorite tight ends with, Dalton Kincaid to kind of correlate with Stephon Diggs. And so I would probably lean into Jeudy at this pick and push tight end a little bit. There's also a lot of consolidated targets in Denver right now with the injury to Patrick and Hamler being, released right now for that heart condition. So a lot of consolidated targets. Judy's looking to kind of capture a lot of those. You could also lean into Greg Dulcich, who's going to see some increased targets as well. So there's a lot of tight ends this year that I really like and I think could have a chance to really outperform ADP early to mid late-ish. And so, that you're talking about rounds like 9, 10, 11, and even, into 12 and 13, there's tight ends I like. So as much as I like Waller, I probably lean Jeudy here though.
Shout out to Chloe L. I do not love every rookie tight end, and some of my takes are dynasty related as well. But I'm glad you're paying attention, Chloe. Thank you. So Nelson, talk a little bit about Jerry Jeudy. Your thoughts on him? You share that with Billy. I know you're bullish on him. Is he a guy that you look at structurally as just a really good pick in terms of expected volume? Or is he a guy that you look at that kind of has an unknown ceiling this year with Sean Payton?
I do think he has an unknown ceiling. And it's not because of Sean Payton. That's the positive, is that Sean Payton's there now and that offense should be competent. My issue is Russell Wilson, and he looked, completely washed last year. And a lot of it had to do with Hackett and that offense and just how everything went down. But it also had to do with, we saw a lot of those reports where Wilson kind of, alienated himself from the team and thought he was kind of upper echelon. And that ended up coming back to bite him. So the question is he motivated this year to actually perform well? So that's the question mark. Because if he is washed, then guess what? That offense is going to fail, and Judy's not going to end up being very good. We need a healthy, motivated Russell Wilson to move the sticks and keep that offense going. So with Waller, you're talking about, in the range of outcomes, I could see him as the tight end 1 this year. And now you've got potential upside in QB 1 in Lamar Jackson and a tight end 1 in Waller. So I would go that way in this particular format. If we were talking in a different format where it wasn't tight end premium, I would say hands down it was Jeudy.
So I think, Billy, the tiebreaker here, I think you guys both had well thought out opinions, and I'm glad that you guys are on 2 of the players that were like towards the top of my queue. Is when I look at the ADP for what's going to be available for me at the end of the 5th and early 6th, with Lamar Jackson out of the way, there's the edge is gone with a potential faller in a Herbert or a Fields. That's out of the question. Those are edge picks to me in this format. So I think that the difference maker is I'm going to have access to some wide receivers I really like. at like that 5-6. So I think I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in Darren Waller, and then I can be done at quarterback, done at tight end, essentially for the next 10 rounds, and I'll probably be naked in my QB build, and it's going to give me more exposure to wide receivers, and then I can make up for it at running back, I believe, with this build because I have so much explosiveness. So that was a really fun process, guys, but this is definitely not a only Let's Help Theo show. So I want to get after it with some of these questions. I'm going to put this pick in. Nelson, why don't you talk a little bit about an article that you wrote, which was really good, and it was called This Year's Josh Jacobs. And we're going to attempt to each give our answer for this year's Josh Jacobs. But Josh Jacobs was unique last year where in a lot of those NFFC leagues that we drafted in, he was falling into the 7th round. He was falling into high RB3 territory. Not a like some of these home drafts, they say, he was running back 20 in my league and he finished as RB1 or RB2. But in the higher stakes, Billy and Nelson, you guys saw him falling. Where was the lowest you saw Jacobs go, if you remember, Nelson?
8th round.
What about you, Billy?
I think I saw him go in the 9th round once or twice.
It's just crazy when we think back, and I think that the process was kind of. I think it's hard to like double check your process, but I think the market kind of piles on guys, and it sometimes they get pushed down even further if a couple people start fading them. So, Nelson, you wrote this article that was awesome. Why don't you give what you're looking for in this sort of running back target, and give us one guy, because I believe you had 3 in the article, but give us one guy you're really bullish on that's being drafted a little later that could give us this kind of potential top 5 RB upside.
Yeah, so based on where Jacobs was being drafted and where he finished, part of the criteria was, first, they needed to have a similar ADP in order for them to fit this year's Josh Jacobs. The other thing that I'm looking for is, where Jacobs finished as far as, receptions. So he had a lot of yards on the ground and touchdowns, but he also, 50 plus receptions last year?
Back-to-back seasons, right?
Yeah. So in order for you to have that type of upside as a running back and finish in the top 5, you got to catch over 50 balls. It's either that or you need to have a Derrick Henry type of workload or a Jonathan Taylor type of workload where you can catch, 25, 30 balls and still finish as, top 3, top 5 running back. So with that said, sometimes it's just not there. You're looking for something that it's like a unicorn, right? You're looking for something and it just doesn't exist. But this year, I definitely think that there's a couple of guys, and I didn't want to force the issue, but I think there's a couple of guys that fit that criteria. And the one guy that is sticking out to me is Rachaad White. And my thinking behind that is, even in a committee where Lenny Fournette was basically the RB1, and White still caught 50 balls last year. And now Brady's gone, and everyone's just looking at that offense as like it's a forgotten offense, right? The last couple of years, everyone wanted a piece of Godwin and Evans and Brady and everything, and now it's like no one cares. And no one cares about Rachaad White based on his ADP. He's a guy that goes anywhere from the 6th to 8th round in every single draft. There's no hype on Rachaad White. That's another important factor because there was no hype with Josh Jacobs. If anything, it was all negativity. And rightfully so. And I took that lazy approach where, I kind of pointed the finger that, it's Josh McDaniels that's there as head coach, and he brought in Brandon Bolden, and they've got Abdullah, and they got Zamir White. You know what? It's just going to be this committee, and, Jacobs hasn't done it before, hasn't been there, hasn't been – he's shown flashes. He always had that talent, and he's caught 50 balls before, but never that workhorse type of running back. And that's why I think Rachaad White is capable of that, because he's kind of there all by himself. They didn't really bring in or draft anyone of substance that I think, is going to warrant taking touches away from White. I think if White, endears himself to the coaches this preseason, that he's going to be the man. Keyshawn Vaughn and I believe Chase Edmonds is there. Like, those guys just don't, to me, are not going to be guys that are going to keep White off the field. So if you have Baker or Trask be about average at quarterback, I think that you could see White, rush for well over 1,000 yards and have 50 plus receptions in that offense.
I love the answer, Nelson. And I'll say that we took a lot of flack at Player Profiler, Billy, in the offseason, especially on the Dynasty end, where Matt and Dario and I really pounded the table for Rachaad White. We had him at like RB15 in Dynasty. You had him highly ranked in redraft, and he survived the offseason completely. That was a place we feared could be a Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs landing spot, a Zach Charbonnet landing spot, and they didn't do anything. And I think one thing that Nelson said that was really, really sharp, this Nelson guy's pretty sharp, guys. That when you see an offense that nobody wants to draft somebody from, it creates artificial values for us because guys get the ADPs get depressed, and people will say, "Oh, you took a guy, from the worst offense in the league with the Bucks." Or I also will say, Nelson, I think Arizona Cardinals, like James Conner and Hollywood Brown, have gotten pushed down really, really far. I got James Conner in the 8th round of an NFFC online championship the other day. So I think sometimes that's how we got Seattle values last year. And that's Cleveland last year. Nobody wanted to draft Browns, and Amari Cooper and Nick Chubb smashed. Billy, anything to add on Nelson's kind of rules with looking at these, not really a rule, but looking at the team situation in terms of the way drafters look at them? Do you spot out opportunity in that sense? And then give us a running back you're looking at that could be a Josh Jacobs.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything Nelson said. I also like White. We were high on him all off season, and even when he was going in round 9, I have a few shares of Rachaad White, even that late in drafts, because he wasn't being looked at then. He's since risen. I think he's going at FFPC in like round 6 and 7 on average. He's been climbing. And so 8th round shares are getting a little harder to come by, but they do exist from time to time. I think that he fits the mold, and the potential output and the volume is there. My only concern with White is the offensive line. It was pretty decimated last year. We're expecting it to be a little bit better because they were hit with injuries, but it still could be a concern. That being said, it may benefit him more in the passing game then. And so I think there's in poker terms, a lot of outs for White to hit, and I still like his potential upside. The other player that I think is worth mentioning, who kind of fits this mold for me as well, is James Conner. And we look at Arizona, kind of a similar situation, though. The offensive line isn't the best, but I always like to look at contracts as well, and then take a look at it and say, well, what does the team have invested moving forward? Can they kind of work them till the wheels fall off, per se, which is what we saw happen with, Josh Jacobs last year. They really didn't have any contract in consideration at the time. They just kind of gave him all this workload. He was used in the passing game as well as the running game. We know Arizona is down DeAndre Hopkins now, so there's a lot of target opportunity as well. James Conner never been a large volume guy, but we did see him take on some pretty significant workloads down the stretch last year. He only played in 13 games. He saw, 183 attempts last year, but we saw, 16 carries, 15 carries, 16 carries, 15 carries, all through that week 14 through 17. And we were seeing 7, 5, 8 targets a game in that frame. So I think if we can get that kind of usage for an entire season out of James Conner, if they can keep him healthy and he, takes care of his body, we're potentially looking at a player who can have, 50 to 60 catches, 1,000 rushing yards, and double-digit touchdowns. And so, like James Conner this year, especially at the price and the cost he's going at, it's not like it's going to hurt you that much if it does miss. Because when I try to miss small, right? You think of golf terms, try to miss small and minimize the risk that it's going to give you if you do miss on it. And I don't think it's going to hurt you that bad if he doesn't perform to that level.
I love your take on Conner, and I know, Nelson, you've been fine with taking Conner as well. I think Conner also does something where he gives you kind of a quick, fast start. If you're drafting like Billy does, where you're really attacking the wide receiver position, James Conner might lead all running backs in touches in the first month of the season. I could completely see that with like a potential Clayton Tune-led offense where they just give the ball to James Conner 25 times and a few of them are receptions, and he does it on volume, and maybe a couple of games he's fallen in the end zone. I think that he's going to have an opportunity to score a lot. Just really quickly, guys, they signed Marlon Mack. Shout out to Joanna in the chat. Does this threaten Keontae Ingram, who's been a handcuff that Billy and I have been drafting? Billy, we took him in the in our last draft last week in that best ball. Or maybe we went Pierre Strong. They're all starting to merge together with the 20th round guys. Nelson, do you think Marlon Mack or Keontae Ingram is the cuff?
I still think it's Ingram.
Okay.
I look at it as I'm not going to read too much into it because they really don't have much there in terms of depth. So adding kind of like a cheap veteran back like Mack, I don't think is really an issue.
Yeah, pour one out for Tyson Williams. He's probably done with the Mack signing. Billy?
Keontae Ingram still.
Good.
Yeah, I think
guys,
you also look at, I always like to look at teams and say he's been there already. He's been in camp. He's been working with the team. He's already gaining rapport. And so Max have to come in and kind of integrate himself into the offense. So it'll take some time as well.
Shout out to Abig Batoba in the chat, one of the best drafters in the country. He's going to be on with me on press coverage this coming week. Guys, we're never going to get that minute of our lives back. Let's never talk about Marlon Mack again on a podcast. Guys, I
blame you for bringing it up.
It's me, and I want to give a shout out to Joanna, who's very active in our chats on a lot of player profiler shows. Guys, I want to talk about this year's Ken Walker. Ken Walker last year, let's remember, was going around RB 40-ish. You'd have certain people push him up, certain people push him down. There was a lot of fear about Rachaad Penny was going to get all the work. Some people were completely off of Walker. Some people looked at him as a potential, guy that might be a second half guy in the season, but he never rose up to the point where you couldn't get him really cheap. Penny does what he does all the time. He went down with an injury. Ken Walker crushed for the end of the season, goes over 1,000 yards rushing. This year is different. It's very like last year, Breece Hall steamed up, was, 4th, 5th, 6th round, depending on where you were drafting. But the rookie running back enthusiasm this year with Bijan in the top 6, 7 picks in your draft, and now Jahmyr Gibbs, a top 30 pick in your draft, you've got to kind of look down the list a little bit for running backs. Who is a running back that maybe has contingent upside that you could see really smashing in the second half of the year, whether it's an injury or just them kind of earning an opportunity? Maybe a rookie that you've enjoyed drafting so far. Let's start with Billy on this one.
I'm going to keep it on brand here and go Roschon Johnson.
Okay.
Standalone value right now, I think he's earning touches. The key to him is going to be pass protection and what he can contribute in the passing game, because the other two running backs haven't really excelled in this category when they've been on the field. So Roschon Johnson has a chance to carve out that role. And if we see an injury to Herbert, he could potentially be a 3-down back. And so like the prospect himself and the talent with Roschon Johnson, had the power as well as the size. And so I think having that combination, being able to get some passing work could potentially set him up for a big season should anything happen to Herbert.
I'm going to go with two guys that I think could have some contingent upside, and that's Kendre Miller. You have the fact that, let alone the suspension, but I think Kendre Miller is a baller, and I think he's going to get pushed down in the fact that I don't think Kamara's suspension is going to be as long as we think. But for me, it's a simple bet that you have two guys that are older, and then you have the 21-year-old Kendre Miller. I think there's also a chance that Kamara's used a little bit more like a receiver. There's been some reports he's being worked in with the wide receivers in camp, and maybe Kendre Miller can just beat out Jamal Williams in the second half of the year. He's got the juice. And the other guy's just Tyjae Spears. There's no buzz, but Tyjae Spears, all we've seen is Hassan Haskins get in trouble off the field. Derrick Henry's been, a volume monster. Derrick Henry's a guy that's coming up on 30 years old. I think Tyjae Spears, if he gets the starts, showed us enough as a prospect. I think he's a talented player. And again, he's cheap. So I'm looking at some of these cheaper rookie RB options. Nelson, any rookies that you're drafting?
Yeah, if we go in terms of like a comparison to Walker and Penny's situation last year, Penny's not this, locked in, no doubt, starter last year. So Walker definitely had a little bit of upside there, being able to outwork him and outperform him. That guy that I feel could be the case is Devon Cheney with the Dolphins, because Mostert and Wilson, the guys there are just, again, I just think are kind of run-of-the-mill type of running backs. Cheney's a little bit, on the smallish side, but I could see him getting worked into that offense for sure. And then if it was an injury-related type of ascension for a backup, rookie, that guy goes, for me, is Chase Brown. I think he's the type of guy that has the juice where, Mixon to me just looked like he just looked, kind of slow. He had a couple of big games last year, but he just didn't look all that great to me. So Brown seems like the guy coming in with the juice that's capable of performing really well in that type of offense.
I love the answer. Nelson, just quickly, your very quick thoughts on Miles Sanders. It was a question from Abib in the chat who wanted you to give a lot more love to Sanders on the Rachaad White question, I think, just because I think Abib wants to feel good about all the Miles Sanders he's been drafting.
Well, I mean, Sanders, out of the three guys that I put in my article, Sanders was another guy that I mentioned. So you told me, just pick one guy.
So there you go. So Abib, I just made Nelson reveal paywall stuff. So that's apologies to Nelson. But Abib, you're good. You're good, Abib.
So hopefully, if Abib, respects my opinion, then he should feel good about his Miles Sanders shares, because Sanders was one of the three guys that I had mentioned.
And if you want to hear Billy Muzio's thoughts on Miles Sanders, you can pop in pretty much any First Class Fantasy, any Dominator. He's been very bullish on him at cost, even though he's rising up a little bit, guys. So he's one to monitor. I think a lot of times, if you're listening to this show and you're listening to it at the end of August, sometimes these players move up a little bit, and then we need to reassess things. Let's talk about a guy maybe less impactful than a Josh Jacobs. But last year we saw also Ramondre Stevenson and Tony Pollard crushed it, and they were drafted as RB3s most of the time. Stevenson steamed up in main events. You saw him go RB23, RB24, but essentially he was an RB3. And Miles Sanders. So those three guys finished inside the top 15 at the position, and they were all drafted as RB3s. How about for some RB3s and RB4s that you guys are into drafting right now? I'll give mine first because I'm into Antonio Gibson. I think Antonio Gibson right now is a guy that you can get for a relatively decent cost. And I think that it's looking more and more like he's going to have like a Jerick McKinnon role plus. And we saw what McKinnon was able to do last year in Kansas City. Obviously a better offense, but same offensive coordinator. It sounds like Eric Bieniemy is really putting his stamp on this offense. I think Gibson's the number 3 target in the offense. And, I think that they're Brian Robinson or Chris Rodriguez. They kind of like Chris Rodriguez is more of a threat to Robinson. So I'm into Gibson. I think like the cost versus the potential outcomes. I think it's a one I'm willing to bet on right now. Love the receiving ability. And we've seen him put up double-digit points per game 3 straight seasons in his career with a number of touchdowns. So I'm into Gibson at cost. How about you, Nelson? Any RB3s or RB4s that you're really, really pounding the table for?
I mean, if I remember correctly, Stevenson started to he was comfortably going like 6th, 7th round in drafts and maybe moved up. So
you probably caused that a little bit, Nelson, when you kept drafting him. Yeah,
I was into Stevenson, and he kind of fit kind of like how I was trying to build my teams. The guy this year for me is probably Alexander Madison. I think he has the same type of ability as Stevenson, and the workload I think is going to be there. I know a lot of people. The funny thing is, I'm actually liking this because a lot of people. He's become a popular guy to shit on, and I haven't really heard many arguments of like pro Madison. So I actually like to be contrarian and go against kind of like the market and the public. So Madison's probably going to be a guy that I'm going to have quite a bit of.
like I think that's interesting, Nelson, because it's like I think he steamed up and then there was like a correction. You're talking about like 7th round Madison.
Yeah, I mean he's I think he's moved up
6th round.
Yeah, he's moved up a little bit, but I think he fits in that range of like what, Stevenson did. And, there were still doubters on Stevenson and the offense and everything and his ability. So I think it's the same thing, with Madison. I think the guys, you've got, rookies and some young guys that are there that people are maybe respecting a little too much, that probably the coaches don't think highly of. And you're going to see Madison have like a Stevenson type, workload to start the year. But now he's got to perform in order to keep that. But that's my thinking on that situation.
Billy, anybody that you're loving out of the RB3, let's call them the high RB4 range and all the RB3s?
It's crazy to say it, but Dalvin Cook has now hit this range inside of drafts. He went out in a draft last night that I was in, and I think I drafted him as like RB33. And to me, it's just exceptionally low. And I know that Dalvin Cook has probably seen his best days behind him, but he still has yet to ever finish, outside of the top 20 at the position fantasy points per game. Even last year, when people were calling him a little washed, he still finished as RB14 in fantasy points per game. I don't think even in some of the worst situations that you can possibly imagine him landing in, it would be hard for him to not return value as RB33 or better, especially when he has the ability to catch the ball, still run the ball, and fall into the end zone. So landing side aside, I think that people are overreacting to the uncertainty. And as soon as he signs anywhere, it could be literally anywhere, we're going to see his ADP climb at least a full round, probably back into that, mid RB 22 to 25 range. And you're going to be able to get yourself at least 10 spots of value at the position, which is probably going to equate to a full round or more inside of drafts. And so I've been pounding him whenever I see him. Like I got him in round 9 the other day, which is just crazy to me.
Yeah, we took him in the in that best ball tournament too, Billy, like super duper late.
Yeah, we got him like 9-10 in that best ball tournament, which is it's because people are just overreacting. And so, I mean, even if one of the worst case scenarios is like if he lands with New England or if he lands at the Jets, I think, because now he's sharing the role with Ramondre Stevenson and Breece Hall. But at the same time, we've seen both these offenses succeed when they've used two backs, and the backs have been relevant at times as well. And both have, excelled. And so I think that there's room for both of them, him in both of these offenses, and he could still outperform RB33 in either instance.
I think another thing to look out for with Dalvin is at this point when we're getting to almost we're getting into August here, guys. And when we get to mid-August, if he hasn't signed, you might see him just sit back and, wait for some sort of attrition. Either a high-end handcuff goes down or a starter goes down, and Dalvin Cook becomes a really a good option for a team that needs a running back. We don't root for that sort of thing, but it happens. It's football. Guys, I want to also touch on other positions here with the next years. Want to look at breakout wide receivers, and I think a lot of times it's a very simple strategy, but trying to identify that second-year wide receiver has been incredibly fruitful for many years. You also have the fact that rookie wide receivers have been hitting. So first, I want to look at trying to identify this year's Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave. Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave were getting drafted as wide receiver 4s or wide receiver 5s. There wasn't a whole lot of love for them. People were taking them. Like I took plenty of each, but it wasn't the sort of steam that you saw with Drake London or with Treylon Burks. So these guys were kind of slightly under the radar, but they both finished inside of the top 25 at the position. I believe Chris Olave was wide receiver 25 on the nose. Both of these guys the counting stats don't speak for their impact because they were second half of the year, plug him and forget about him type guys. Nelson, any rookie wide receivers that you're looking to add to your builds right now?
He's coming with hype, so I definitely think that he's going to move way up as August moves along, and that's Zay Flowers. I just think that when you look at Bateman seems to be struggling to stay on the field. You have Beckham there, who I think brings in a veteran presence. He'll make a highlight catch here and there throughout the season. But I think Flowers is the kid with the juice that is going to be able to get open on a consistent basis and become one of Lamar's favorite targets.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you on Zay, because I think that JSN and Jordan Addison are both rising, and you've seen Quentin Johnston also rise. But Zay Flowers has the potential to be the number 2 target in that offense and get the most wide receiver targets. And Zay Flowers is nasty too. Like, I think it just, like, people talk about like the opportunity, but he makes these plays on tape where he looks kind of like Deebo Samuel, just running through defenses, making people miss. He's a physical player for his size, and he ran very well. And by all accounts, he's tearing it up in Baltimore. Billy, your thoughts on this exercise?
Yeah, I could, beat the drum and continue to talk about Addison, but I'll move past that one for this conversation. I'm going to mention someone else, and it'll be Rashee Rice. There's a lot of opportunity here for this Kansas City Chiefs receiving core. We saw that, Kadarius Toney, got re-injured, and I have questions if he can ever stay on the field during his career. And now we've seen some pretty consolidated targets between Sky Moore, Rice, and then, of course, you got the MVS and Richie James and a couple other pieces there as well. But I think that Rice has an opportunity to step into a pretty large role. This offense has about 152 vacated targets, and that could even become more if Toney misses more time. So I loved Rice as a prospect, loved his tape coming into the league, and I think that his landing spot was one of the best for the rookies. We saw the Chiefs spend a round 2 pick on him, so they're planning to get him involved, and with him really only competing with Sky Moore and of course Travis Kelce for real touch competition, I think that he has a chance to see 80 plus targets.
And they're starting to, like, there's reports out of camp in Kansas City that they're giving him like manufactured touches, which I think is really kind of cool and unexpected. Like, they're talking about like sweeps, design runs, a little more screen passes. I mean, he seemed like a guy that they were going to line up on the outside to me, but it sounds like they view him as a versatile player. So I love that answer from Billy. Love the answer from Nelson. Second year wideouts guys have been like cheat code. This is something you could have done for years and got value out of drafting second-year wideouts. Now the market's kind of caught up with it, but we still see guys go under the radar and get drafted too low. Last year, Jalen Waddle smashed his ADP. Last year, Amon-Ra St. Brown crushed his ADP, and the cheat code was Devonta Smith. Devonta Smith was going off the board like wide receiver 37, 38, 39, wide receiver 40. And he ends up finishing with more receptions than any Philadelphia Eagle in any season ever. Who is the second-year wide receiver that you really see smashing? And guys, you can take this to the top. Like Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, they've gotten steamed way up. But if you select them at ADP and they finish top 5 at the position, it doesn't really matter about the cost you're putting in there. But then there's a couple other guys that are getting pushed up, the Drake Londons. Anybody you want to take, Nelson, that you're really bullish on heading into their second year at wide receiver?
That's going to be Sky Moore for me.
Love that.
I think, Wilson and these guys, Drake London, they're on the radar. They're on everyone's radar. They're going in the top 4 rounds. So I'm always looking for kind of like, who's that other guy that can ascend and still goes at a fairly decent price. And Moore is the guy for me. He's in the right offense. And I think that people expected a lot from him last year, and he just didn't get on the field. And I think people have soured on him a little bit, and he got a little too much hype last year. So now I feel like people are not paying attention as closely as they should. And it's been the Sky Moore show. And, Billy, I totally understand the Rashee Rice, pick and everything. But I think that Sky Moore, we're kind of looking for like that next guy, and we're forgetting that Sky is just in his second year. So like I could see that where he just becomes like the consistent number 2 target in that offense and gets used a little bit like Tyreek did when he was there. where they start running some jet sweeps with him and just get the ball in his hands. And he's just much more comfortable in year 2.
Yeah, we've been talking about Sky Moore actually on the Dynasty side on the Sonic Truth Dynasty podcast. There's a lot of hype. And again, like he came out of Western Michigan, day 2 guy, but he was at essentially a small school with the MAC production. So a lot of times those guys from that conference or some of these smaller conferences, it takes them a year to get used to everything at the NFL level. So, and the Kansas City playbook under Andy Reid, they're running some complex stuff. This is not just a like, hey, come in there and play right away. So I think Sky Moore's a really good one. Nelson, you've actually seen him move up. He was going at like a wide receiver 5. Now he's heading towards wide receiver 3 land. So definitely one to monitor for the rest of the summer. Billy, give us a year 2 guy that you're into, especially at cost.
I was going to double dip on this one, so I was actually going to mention Sky with Rashee Rice, and a lot of the same reasons that I mentioned with Rice. So I completely agree with Nelson on the Sky Moore. He's a perfect example of a player who I wanted nothing to do with last year, then I'm in on this year. And it just breaks down a situation. We have to analyze these situations every single year, and we have to recalibrate and look at draft boards fresh. And so people are bitter because they overspent on Sky Moore last year, and they're just not going back to the well. Another player I think that fits this mold for me is going to be Treylon Burks, and I've been doing even more now with the addition of DeAndre Hopkins. People are looking at it as this huge negative for him, and I don't think that's the scenario. If anything, it tells me that they are still trying to be competitive, and that Tannehill more than likely plays all year now, where in prior we were questioning, were we going to see Will Levis? Were we going to see Malik Willis? And so there were so many different possibilities between Treylon Burks and the outcomes of this offense. But now the fact that they signed DeAndre Hopkins tells me that they want to remain competitive and they're still trying to win. And now Treylon Burks doesn't have to worry about double coverage, doesn't have to worry about taking on the number 1 cornerback or DB. And so he can go up against the number 2 in the offense while the attention is drawn by DeAndre Hopkins. They're going to also have to keep defenses honest because they have King Henry running the ball, and they're not going to be able to just drop people back. There may be times where they even load the boxes, which is going to create more lanes for Treylon Burks as well. So I think that he is a player that he actually hasn't fallen as much as I was hoping he was going to fall with the DeAndre Hopkins news. He has fallen, a round or 2. But I love where he's going still in drafts and have been continuing to smash the button when I see him on the clock.
Yeah, no, I love that one. And for me,
do we lose Theo? We lost Theo.
I think so.
Well, while Theo's reloading, Nelson, why don't we look at? Oh, are you back, Theo?
I hope so, Billy. Apologize, guys. I don't know what's going on over here. But I'll say Jahan Dotson is my answer here.
Dotson. Nice.
Jahan Dotson. I think that he's got the opportunity in this offense to take a big step in year 2. He's going off the board as wide receiver.
He's out. He's gone. Why don't we move on, Nelson, until he's back? Why don't we move on to the quarterback position? I know this is something that Theo wanted to touch base on at the beginning of the hour. Is there any quarterbacks, let's say, outside of the top 12? So let's focus on like quarterbacks 13 through quarterback 24-ish. So the quarterback 2 range. Anyone that you are particularly targeting that you think has a chance to finish inside the top 12 of the position? Last year, we saw 2 quarterbacks at name off the top of my head that I can think about. Geno Smith, who was going undrafted in a lot of leagues, who finished inside the top 10. Justin Fields, who was going outside the top 12 at the position, who finished inside the top 7 at the position. Is there any quarterback in particular this year that you like who are going outside the top 12 that you think have a chance to finish inside the top 10?
I'm not necessarily targeting these guys, but there are guys if I end up passing on one of those top tier quarterbacks, I'm trying to get 2 of these guys. Mm-hmm. I could definitely see Jared Goff, Derek Carr, and Jordan Love are like the 3 guys that I could see where they have the weapons and could perform as a top 10 type of quarterback.
So you just mentioned 2 of my top 4 most owned quarterbacks inside my ownership. Love Goff, love. Too many loves, I guess.
Yeah.
Love where they're going at ADP right now on the offenses and the weapons that they have. Another one for me that I really like that has been kind of flying under the radar right now that I think could take a major step forward in year 2 is going to be Pickett. And I love the fact that they, bolstered up this offensive line. I've talked about this a lot on podcasts that they went out and got Broderick Jones in round 1, a blocking tight in round 3, addressed the position even more. And they still have a lot of weapons. I mean, Pratt Freiermuth has had an outstanding, beginning to his career. And then we've had, Pickens, who has just been a jump ball freak. He's an athletic monster, probably looking to take a big step forward as well. Deontay Johnson, another big weapon for him, who's just a target hog. Najee hasn't been the most efficient runner, but still presents himself as a valuable NFL running back, maybe not as much as the fantasy asset as we were hoping for. But love Pickett as well and where he's going. I find myself actually taking a lot of Jordan Love and Pickett in these drafts where I double tap them late, and because I like to push the position, and it's easy to stack, get Deontay Johnson, who's been climbing, but still going at a value, get Watson, who again has been climbing, but still going, I think, at a value comparison where I haven't projected at. And so love the fact that you can pair these quarterbacks with them so late, and you can still address the running back or receiver position or mix in a tight end in between as well.
Yep.
Welcome back, Theo.
Yeah, guys, sorry about that. So I wanted to also touch base on the tight end position. Last year, Tyler Higbee and Evan Engram were both drafted as tight end 2s and both finished easily as tight end 1s. Engram crushed at the end of the year. Higbee went over 100 targets. Give us a couple of tight end targets, Nelson. Back end tight end 1 down to tight end 2s that you think should be part of our draft plan.
I'm probably gonna say Dalton Schultz is one of those guys that I think could end up being very similar to like a Higbee, where in the offense where he's just kind of like that, going to be that consistent performer, not flashy or anything like that. And then for like an Ingram type, I'm going to say that I don't know if there's another tight end. There's going to be, but I don't know if there's another tight end really that I'm that interested in down there in that tier. But obviously, like at FFPC, tight ends get valued greatly, and quite a few of them get drafted. So I'll probably say like let me mention a forgotten guy that's boring, but is probably going to end up putting up a productive season, and that's Hunter Henry with the Patriots. So first year, same thing. It was, he was getting drafted really late. No one was really interested in him. He was there with Janu, and then he started moving up. It was kind of like, okay, who do you take? I think they both went like 10th roundish area 2 years ago. And now he's just kind of like that forgotten guy. But if that offense gets moving, I could see where he could be, just that boring guy that you take as your tight end 2, and you can stick in your lineup, and he'll, give you some fantasy production.
Billy, is this year's Tyler Higbee just Tyler Higbee?
Yes, I was going to say Tyler Higbee. There's just not a lot of competition for targets here. And Cooper Kupp already dealing with a hamstring injury. We know that there's a lot of targets available and up for grabs. Van Jefferson is arguably the number 2. And so I would say that Higbee's probably the number 2. He came off a career year last year. I think they're going to keep it rolling. The other player I think worth mentioning is Greg Dulcich. And I think that we could see I'm higher on the Denver Broncos just in general than most people are, with the addition of Peyton, and Russell Wilson was pretty much dog shit last year, finished as quarterback 18 in fantasy points per game, but now he's being drafted as quarterback 18 in drafts a lot of the times. And so we're seeing him be drafted at his floor, where I think he has a pretty good opportunity to outperform that. And so you can stack him pretty late with Dulcich, and you could add Judy earlier in the mix, and you get, a lot of the key pieces to this offense, especially with the consolidated target tree that I just mentioned. Patrick out, Hamler out, and so Javonte is still battling back from injury. He's ahead of timeline, but I still think that we're probably going to see this offense be a little bit more pass heavy to start the season, and that's going to benefit Greg Dulcich and the rest of this receiving core. And if that's successful, I should say, then I think that we continue to see that model throughout the season, and they're just going to kind of lean into it. So love Greg Dulcich in drafts, love Higbee in draft, been loving kind of pushing to that spot and just double tapping them.
Yeah, and we had Sean Corner on. Billy and I got a chance to talk with him on Mind a Mansion, and we talked about how much he loves Dulcich. Dulcich in the Joker role, guys, which is really exciting.
And that was before the injuries.
Yeah, it's been like it's consolidation in Denver for sure. This is we're reaching an hour here, but I got one more question for you guys in terms of this year's. Last year we had Amari Cooper and Tyler Lockett were both getting drafted essentially as low end wide receiver 3s, high end wide receiver 4s. Christian Kirk steamed up, but he was still a wide receiver 3. All three of those guys crushed it. Give us some veteran wide receivers that you think the market might be too low on. Start with Billy on this one.
I think DeAndre Hopkins is probably a name, at least throwing the name in the hat. We're seeing him climb, but I still don't think it's been high enough. I know that this offense hasn't been the most pass heavy, but they really haven't had a receiver of his caliber, up to date. And so people would argue AJ Brown, but who's beginning of his career was, learning the speed of the NFL, getting kind of acclimated with the team and the offense. And so Hopkins, that veteran presence coming in, going to, I think, make big plays, be the clear cut number one, but also have a pretty balanced offense and attack. And I think that is going to be pretty beneficial for him in this point of his career. And he's being drafted pretty late in comparison to where he has a chance to finish. So, I mean, would it shock you if DeAndre Hopkins was like top 10 at the position through like the first 4 weeks? Because it wouldn't shock me based upon what we've seen in his career at all.
No, I mean, we saw that big year with AJ Brown on 110 targets. It sounds like the D-Hops, they want to get more to. So I agree with you. I think he's a little beat up. Brandon Ayuk is my guy right now. I love drafting Brandon Ayuk. Again, he's getting drafted higher than the Lockett Cooper discount we got last year, but I still think he could be an impactful guy at ADP. How about you, Nelson?
I'd probably say Chris Godwin is the guy that, no one really cares about. Again, down on that offense. And I like to look at it as, that might be a positive for me where, I'm looking more of like, what are the forgotten offenses that could be sneaky? And Godwin's like that player that, he goes in the 5th, 6th round sometimes in drafts. And we could, wake up at the end of the season and see him, with, 85 plus catches. And that would probably shatter, his value for where he was going in ADP. So that would be my guy.
Yeah, I mean, like you talked about with Rachaad White, nobody wants to draft Bucks, but Chris Godwin went over 100 receptions, over 90 the year before. I mean, the guy's been a proven fantasy player for us for years. Nelson, give us a player that your thoughts have changed on in a positive sense since June, and maybe one that's kind of gone down since the last time you were on First Class Fantasy with us.
It would probably be Jahmyr Gibbs, because back in June when I was on with you guys, I was not a fan of the landing spot for him. And that was my first initial reaction. And it was before I really got like really into, drafting season. And that has changed for me after giving it like more thought. I do think that him and Montgomery can coexist. I do think that offense was kind of sneaky last year, and I actually think that it can take another step and go to the next level this year. So with Gibbs, a lot of people use those comparisons. Some people see it as, the way I saw it back in June was, well, Gibbs is going in the 3rd round, 4th round, and he just can't return value where he's going because, he's not going to get 200 plus carries. But I look at it as more of like, a Kamara type thing where he coexisted with Ingram, and he's more than capable of catching, 60, 70 balls this year. And, Montgomery hasn't really been a perfect picture of health the last couple of years. He seems to get banged up himself. So if that happens, we could be looking at Gibbs where he could be a top 5 running back. And I think that's why he's getting drafted where he is. So I see the talent. I can see where he can still return value in the 3rd round. And that's the guy that I've done a 180 on. In terms of a guy that I was probably okay drafting back then, and now I'm just not interested. It would probably be probably Jonathan Taylor would be the guy. Just bad vibes out of that whole situation, and I see that offense where although there's a lot of hype around Anthony Richardson, he's still a rookie, and I watched some Florida tape, and he was not a very accurate quarterback at Florida. So what makes
Putting it nicely.
Putting it nicely. Yeah. I don't want to be, I don't want to go and hammer on the kid, but he couldn't throw at Florida, and he went in and ripped up the combine, and now everyone is in love with him. And I think there's going to be some growing pains. And we've seen this before out of rookie quarterbacks where, the light is shining bright on the guy until the lights turn on and that quarterback struggles. And I think we're going to see a little bit of that. So even if Taylor settles his differences with the Colts and comes back, I could see where that offense just kind of sputters and is just not very good. And, Taylor delivers kind of another lackluster performance.
Love the Gibbs answer. I agree. Taylor is a difficult one. I think you might even get an opportunity to draft him cheaper as these weeks keep coming. For me, Darren Waller, we talked about him earlier. I'm like 2 rounds higher than I was in FFPC and NFFC type drafts for him. I think that it really is happening. I think he's going to have 130 targets. I think he's a focal point of what I believe will be a really, really good offense. I'm bullish on Daniel Jones. I like the Giants in general. I think they're going to score a lot of points in year 2 under Dable. And the reports on Waller out of camp are positive every single day. It's definitely Daniel Jones's preferred target. And for me, guys, like 6 weeks ago, Billy, I saw J.K. Dobbins as such a dangerous guy to add my builds, like dangerous in a good way, where the elite upside was there. This was all falling into place. And now I get worried. He's upset about his contract. We have him missing practice. He's a little bit banged up. Harbaugh is talking him up. But again, this is a guy that's only played in 23 NFL games. I have big worries here in terms of using a 5th round pick on him. I think I'm out unless we see him back on the field and we have a little more positivity. And I think 5th round Dobbins is not something I'm going to be investing in. So Waller and Dobbins for me, Gibbs and Taylor for Nelson. Where are you at, Billy?
I got Dobbins in round 7 last night. I pulled the trigger. It just continued to fall, and I said at that point I'm willing to take the gamble. But like both your guys' calls, I think the number one person for me is probably right now is Deshaun Watson, a player who I was not really interested in drafting earlier in the offseason. But as things kind of start to come together and reports from camp, and I think he's maybe not. I don't think we'll probably ever see the Deshaun Watson that we saw in Houston, but I do think with his ability to run the ball as well with the weapons that he still has the ability to finish inside the top 10 position, where I had him outside the top 10 in my original run projections. And so I'm starting to come around on him a little bit. I like the addition of Elijah Moore there as well. And so I think there's a lot of outs for him to actually maybe exceed my expectations. So I'm coming around on him a bit. A player that I am, I guess now not in, or yeah, souring on. and I was in on them earlier, it's probably Breece Hall. And I think it's just in relation to the uncertainty. It's clear they want to add another back, whether that's Dalvin Cook or not. I think that it's never a good sign when you have a team who has a running back coming off of an injury who now wants to add another piece to the mix. It just says that either one, they don't fully trust where he's at in his recovery, or two, they just want to lighten his workload. So either way you dissect it, it's not a good thing for Breece Hall. And he was, going in the beginning of the third, at times sneaking into the second round. And so now I'm even kind of hesitant in round 4 when I see him on the board. And so I think that it's one of those players now I'm kind of pumping the brakes on.
The last question, Nelson, you've been really generous with your time. We're at an hour 10. Billy and I have asked pretty much everybody this on First Class Fantasy, and I've asked people this on press coverage. Who's the player that's given you the most problems in rankings? Like, you could see having a wide range of outcomes here, and a player that if you could know their final stats of the season, who would it be?
Oh man, that's actually a good question. I think you might have me stumped right now. A player that I can't figure out in my rankings right now.
Or one player who, if you could see their final projections this year of any player in football, who would it be?
Christian Watson.
Okay.
I think that's the guy that I was really high on him last year, and I was able to add him to a lot of my teams. And I'm trying to be careful not to be too biased because he did help a lot of my teams last year.
And just a hat tip to not interrupt you, Nelson, but the Christian Watson breakout game, he was in Nelson's starting lineup. I'll give you props for that one, Nelson.
Yeah, so thank you. I appreciate it. I think we shared a few teams last year, so you got to see that.
I enjoyed that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So that one was a waiver wire Wednesday night special, and it was like, yeah, we're putting him in, and we put him in over some other, wide receivers where, the vanilla rankings or some of the rankings that were out there, you wouldn't have thought of using Watson. So that was nice. And it was nice to get that infusion of those stats from Watson. So that's the guy for me now in year 2, where I'm trying to be careful with him on not getting too high on him. He's getting drafted pretty highly, and I could see it where it's one of those like scenarios where, it's like the hype guy, right? Like Cortland Sutton, for example, was that guy last year, right? And I fell for it myself, where I started moving Sutton way up the draft board, and it just didn't end up working out. So I got to be careful with that, where there's question marks with Jordan Love. Can Love take over and be, a capable quarterback to move this offense? And our defense is going to, respect him enough, or are they going to look at it as like, what, he can't throw, so we don't need to be worrying about Watson deep. I could see it where, Watson disappoints, and at the same time I could just see it where he showed enough flashes last year where there were some games where he looked like Randy Moss light, and I could see where he could smash. And then I'm sitting there at the end of the season scratching my head like, why didn't I draft more of this guy? Or I could be banging my head against the wall and saying, why did I fall for this again? And draft this guy up, so high when there's so many question marks in that offense.
I love the answer. I'm in on Christian Watson. But yeah, last year, Gabe Davis, Cortland Sutton, there was a few of these guys that got steamed up big time, and, it didn't happen, and it hurt people. Watson, I will say, like right now, he's going somewhere between like wide receiver 21 and wide receiver 25. So we haven't seen like the incredible steam yet, but it's definitely one to monitor this month. Nelson, let everybody know where they can find you.
At FTN Fantasy, go there, subscribe to my package. And there's besides myself, you're getting a lot of great content from a lot of great players and fantasy analysts there at FTN Fantasy. We have a lot of talented guys, so definitely go there and subscribe if you guys are interested in my content.
No, for sure. Highly recommend Nelson's content. Definitely follow him on Twitter as well. Billy, do you have a Dominator coming up this week?
We do. Matt and I are recording on Sunday. We'll work out the times here probably today or tomorrow. We got it fitted into the schedule with the rest of the busy podcast schedule, but we will record on Sunday.
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out to First and 15. Their episode with Scott Barrett dropped. You can check it out on our YouTube. But that was really, really excellent. Abib Agbatoba, Dio Adesai, and Chris Henderson have been putting out great stuff. Highly recommend First and 15. Definitely check it out. Scott Barrett was the first guest that they've ever had on, and it was a really, really good one. Also want to give a shout out to our programming partners at the Deep End. If you like the high stakes content that we talked about tonight, make sure you check them out. And then I'm always giving hat tips to my guys at the GOAT District. Nelson's going to be in the district next week. That should be really cool. We also have Chris Vaccaro and Billy Wazowski, two of the better high stakes players in the country, both NFFC Hall of Famers, coming on the GOAT District next week as well. So, we're bringing you the heat on Player Profiler. You're not going to find any better high stakes content anywhere right now in terms of the number of podcasts we're giving you. Stick with First Class Fantasy all August and beginning of September. Billy and I are looking to crush it. We're going to win a lot of money. Stick with us this summer and enjoy your weekends.
Hey, you like that video? Be sure to subscribe and activate those alerts so you get notified as soon as new videos drop. And be sure to check out PlayerProfiler.com. We have all the tools for you to dominate every type of fantasy league. We have a draft kit, Dynasty Deluxe, data analysis, DFS Dominator, and don't forget the player rankings to rule them all.